Want to welcome everybody here to our presentation on diversifying your business. What we're going to do is review a presentation that Rich and I did at Coverings earlier this year. We've got a lot of data. Rich is going to cover most of the data because he's pulled it together, and he also did a quick update late yesterday as well. So we've even got some new stuff that people at Coverings didn't see. But one of the reasons we're doing this is at Coverings we only had 30 minutes, and we had a lot of questions. And we felt like, okay, let's offer this again as a webinar, and let's go ahead and schedule an hour for it so we can do a quick review of the presentation and have plenty of time to talk about it. So as we're going through the presentation, talk about things, if you've got questions, speak up. Be happy to discuss. The whole point here is to not just dump a bunch of information on you, but have a good conversation. And if you need some clarification or want to get into some details, we can do that. If anybody wants to hang out afterwards, we'll go ahead and do that. Should be up and running. All right. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Ed Young, Fabricator's coach. I helped start the DuPont program over 20 years ago. I've managed a countertop shop. I've run multiple manufacturing plants in multiple industries. I've owned my own brick and mortar business. So I've had to meet payroll, manage cash flow, and deal with all the challenges that you folks do. So that's kind of a thumbnail sketch of my background. Rich, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Rich Katzmann, only 10 years in the industry, maybe 12 years. So relatively new, I guess, or I'd say medium. Ran laser products for 5 years. That's how I really, got into the industry, met 1,000 shops, all of the vendors in the, in the industry. And for the last 3 years, I've been running Rockheads. For those of you who don't know, Rockheads is a best practices organization. We've got 120 shops across the country. Most of them are larger, not all of them, but most of them are larger, like-minded, willing to share benchmarking information, secret sauce, best practices. And so essentially the Rockheads just puts people together so that you're all learning from each other, and not making the same mistakes that others who have been down your path have already done. So happy to be here, Ed. Thanks for inviting me out to this. This is great.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time, Rich. You got a lot of stuff going on. We were chatting a little bit before we started up. You got some really good events coming up. And for those of you who, I know as shop owners, a lot of times you're kind of on this island by yourself. And if you don't ever get out in the industry and meet other shop owners and get involved with some of these organizations, I highly recommend it. I talk to a lot of folks, work with some of them. And one of the common themes I see is that shop owners who get out and network with other shop owners, join groups like Rockheads, ISFA, NSI, and the rest, you really get a better sense of what the possibilities are in the industry. You learn a lot from each other. I think Rockheads, in my opinion, does the absolute best job with best practices and benchmarking. In fact, we did a session on that last month. And they've just got some super information, a lot of really good members. So if you're interested in something like that, Rich is the guy to talk to. And again, as we go through this presentation, we're not doing a sales pitch today. This is purely to provide information for you. So if we talk about something and you've got a question, speak up, raise your hand, scream, throw something. We'll make sure you get your questions and comments in, okay? Good deal. We're going to talk through the different types of diversification, ways to diversify your product line and your market segments, that sort of thing. We'll talk about those different customer types, and then we'll start looking at, okay, as you make changes like this or you begin to consider them, what are some other issues you got to be aware of that as you make decisions like this? Rich, you want to?
Yeah. So a lot of what we're going to talk about today, and especially the first part of this presentation, is the different market segments out there, right? It's a shop needs to be set up differently to be profitable with a big box than they do, for an example, a custom builder, right? The margins are different, the requirements are different, the sales is different. I mean, all down the line, the complexity of the fabrication is different. Everything changes, right? And so the idea of this is to present what's going on in the industry right now in these different segments, right? Who's growing, who's contracting, to just kind of paint the picture of why it's important to not have all your eggs in one basket, So I get to do the easy part, which is go through that. Then Ed gets the hard part of, okay, if you're doing big box and custom builders, how the heck do you do both at the same time? Right. And so that's really what we're talking about here. We're going to touch a little bit on different products also, right? An example being porcelain right here on the slide. We have a shop in Florida that just cut their 2,000th porcelain slab. And I know, a lot of folks, even within the Rockheads, are afraid to touch porcelain because of the breakage factors and all of that stuff. But what they do, for example, is when a customer comes in and wants white quartz, they know that none of their competitors around do porcelain. So they upgrade that quartz customer to porcelain and lock them in, right? So there's some different strategies as far as products go where you can use some diversity to increase, your close rate on different things. So that's really what we're going to talk about here for the next, half an hour, 45 minutes. And again, this is just a quick slide, right? We view diversity as kind of like a stock portfolio or a portfolio, right? You want to have some safe things that pay the bills. Then you want some other things where if cash isn't earning any money, now you want to be in stocks. Maybe you want to be in bonds. Maybe you want to own some real estate. So what we're doing is looking at, your company as a whole and saying, all right, how do we minimize risk by, again, once track building kind of went away a year and a half ago, what did you have in your bag? What relationships did you have that you could increase to make up for some of those losses? All right, just a couple of quick charts here. And these are all pretty fresh. So most of them are kind of March, April of this year. The big one, and then if you want to hit click one more time, let's throw that table up there too. Should just be the next. There we go. But once you get them, go on down them all. Boom, 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 boom. There we go. So the first slide here. Whoop. One too many. Multifamily. Right. If you're in the multifamily business, it is really slowing down. Out of all the different segments, there's been so much activity in multifamily over the last couple of years. It's finally caught up in many of the cities, not all, but many of the cities. So I've got a bunch of friends that do cut to size, big multifamily, 300 unit projects, and all of their businesses are hurting. That's kind of one thing that we see happening. After the 25-26 dip that we're going to see, 15% or so, just the first year, then another 15% the next year, it'll start to stable out. But if you have a strategic initiative to go out and get multifamily work, it's going to be a challenge because it's going to be a race to the bottom as far as pricing goes because there's so many fewer of those projects out there, right? So then just kind of sliding over to the right, what we're seeing with retail business, retail walk-in business, nice steady increases. Hasn't necessarily happened yet, but going into 25 and 26, nice 4% increases in retail. So a nice safe place to be. Obviously, a big mortgage interest rate drop will increase that, but that's kind of been built into these numbers already. The Fed saying fourth quarter this year, we're going to do one drop. That's kind of what the industry believes right now as far as interest rates going. At the beginning of the year, they were supposed to be doing 3, which was supposed to help our industry. But with, inflation reports and stuff going on, they've just decided we're not ready yet. So we're going to see a nice increase in retail. K&B, professional remodel is kind of tracking the same, right? An additional, a little bit more aggressive, 8% growth, and then back to that 4% growth. So just looking at this top line, right? If I'm looking at, all right, we've got 25 coming up here in 6 months, where do I want to beef up maybe my sales initiatives? Yep, I would pick K&B over multifamily in a heartbeat. Then getting into commercial, it's tracking with multifamily. Two things, right? COVID, nobody's working anymore from office buildings. So the office space market has just really gone away. And just as multifamily overbuilt during COVID and this year, commercial tended to do the same. You can see the big increase going into 24, and now it's starting to pull back, right? So again, about a 10% decrease next year from this year, which hasn't really been a great year anyway. So we would kind of warn a little bit against getting too heavily into the commercial marketplace. And then the chart here just kind of represents the summary of these graphs. Ed, I know I tend to talk fast and often. What are your what are your kind of thoughts when looking at this?
Well, I'm seeing the same thing with shops that I talk to. And I don't know if any of you guys, Rich, I think you guys do, but if anybody on the call maybe subscribes to ITR Economics, probably one of the better economic forecasting companies that I know of out there. And all of this, I mean, this is all from NKBA data sources, but when I'm thinking about what I've been seeing from ITR Economics recently, this tracks directly with what they're forecasting for the next several years for each of these segments. So I think that's definitely spot on. And obviously, we're talking about nationwide trends here. When you get into different parts of the country, we got some areas of the country where there's people moving out, or there's areas of the country where people are moving in, and we'll get to a chart of that in a minute. But your local area, your mileage may vary, so to speak. So kind of keep that in mind. And so that's one of the things I'm seeing too. There's still a couple of areas that a little bit of commercial is still pretty hot that I've talked to shops in those areas. So this is just kind of a nationwide cut at things, that really high level view.
Yeah, and Ed, I'm glad you mentioned that too. So we're seeing, as the blue box shows, right? So polling our members, BBI, Grand Courts, right, the consumable guys, and the manufacturers, everybody's kind of seeing this 10 to 20%, 10 to 15% pullback from last year. And at the end of last year, what we were promised, quote unquote, right, is that 24 would at least match 23, and there was a chance that 24 would be better than 23. And that certainly hasn't materialized. So if you're feeling the pressure, you're certainly not alone out there. What this leads to, right? So here's the plus side of it. Vendors in our market are ready to deal. I talked to Doll Tile about a month ago, and they're down too. And so if you've got a local guy, they're all trying to hit their quotas. They're all trying to hit their numbers. I know the machine guys are really hurting. So if you're in the market for anything, now's a really good time to go in there and have a little bit more strength negotiating than, end of last year when everybody thought things were going to pick up.
And add to that, I did a podcast with Eric Rapp of Everest Stone a few months ago. It's up on my podcast channel. And he was talking about just some general trends on how to work with your slab supplier and some ways you can work with them to get better service, better pricing, that sort of thing. Maybe interesting. I may talk with him again just to do an update and see what the impact is on that side of the business. But I'm sure that on the supply side of things, on the slab side, there's probably some deals out there as well.
Yeah, for sure. All right, just a couple more on this stuff. These are quicker. Here's the multifamily trend, right? This is what's, that we're seeing out there. And this kind of emphasizes the point. If you guys can see this chart, right, the dotted line is what they were telling us was going to happen at the end of last year, right? A decrease, but not that bad, right? And it was going to turn right away in 2024. Then they updated it with the bigger dashes it's going to be a little worse, right? Then there was a little optimism, and now the solid line is where we are today, right? So this is, again, just showing how the flexibility of these projections, and those are big swings within, kind of what they said in August versus now. What we are seeing, and this is really big within our membership, is while multifamily new construction is down, many current apartment buildings are remodeling. And so a lot of our groups that were set up to do large multifamily projects have now diverted sales resources and everything into the flips, into the, the remodels. So what they're seeing is, a 300 unit building, they may be getting 20 jobs a month instead of all 300 when it's ready to go. And that's been really working well for those guys. And Kansas City is super hot. There's a couple of different markets out there. So as we're seeing this big drop in new construction within multifamily, the remodels are actually going to increase over the next couple of years. And then, as Ed had kind of mentioned, there's still some really hot markets out there for multifamily, right? There's just cities that, you can see the southern cities, kind of the California fleeing, the Chicago fleeing, where people are moving to are still extremely hot as far as new multifamily going up. There's your Charlotte, Charlotte's a really nice one too, growing like crazy. So
Yeah,
that's
and this chart on the right-hand side is raw number of units. It's not a percent increase. And so when you've got a large area like a Denver or an Orlando or something, a really big city, this may be a smaller percent increase in a place like, say, Charlotte or maybe Raleigh Durham or something like that. So keep that in mind as you look at the data.
I was just in Orlando, and it's insane how many new apartment buildings are half built out there right now. So Orlando is rocking these days.
Yeah, I was in Charlotte not long ago, saw the same thing. Every time you turn around, there's a new one going up.
And then the next slide, just to kind of emphasize this a little bit, and then we'll leave it. I think we'll beat it to death after this. If you look at so what we're saying is, right, multifamily 15% off next year as a nation, right? Yeah. But if you start looking at states, there are definitely states where it's popping still, right? So depending on where you are, and all of this information is available out there, just through it's all free too, through some Google searches and some digging and all of that good stuff. So, Chris, you guys up in Washington are seeing a 35% decrease, right? But the lady who dialed in from Maine, and look at Maine, it's 260% increase, right? So we like to talk globally, but immediately you have to start breaking that down to your region. And then the chart on the right is kind of the same concept for single family, for builders, right? Where some states are seeing, some good growth, some states are seeing a decline. So Ed, do we make these presentations available afterwards?
Yeah, we can. Yeah, anybody who wants it, just shoot me an email at ed@fabricatorscoach.com and we'll get you a copy. That's probably the easiest way.
Sure.
Yep.
All righty. So that's it for that. The last kind of slide that I'm going to lead on, Ed, then it's all yours, my friend, as the ops expert, is, at Rockheads, we do an extensive benchmarking. So we can see across the country what our members are charging customers in different market segments, right? And so this chart is just meant to be very illustrative to the huge pricing variances between the different segments, right? When you've got walk-in retail, at $100 a foot, but your production builders are at $60 a foot, right? So, it's hard to run a shop when you've got a $40 a foot variance between, different types of consumer segments, right? So, and this is always interesting. It stays pretty consistent with this, just so you guys all know, right? The Rockheads as a group have been right around this $75 to $78 average square foot to consumer price. So if you guys wanted to check that out too and see how you guys match up in these different segments, it's a nice handy little table. And then Ed, I love my benchmarking number that Grand Quartz kind of developed back in the 70s. A really cool little check for everybody is across the country, if you take the number of employees you have and multiply that times $200,000, that across the country is the average revenue that shop should have. Or, so I said that pretty clumsy. So if you take your revenue and divide it by the number of employees you have, if that number's below $200,000, you might have more employees than you need, right? And that number hasn't changed in years. The Rockheads last year, 75 companies submitted, and the number was $201,000, right? So we're always right there seeing that. Just a nice little check. Ed always likes to throw in, so I'm going to steal your thunder, Ed, right? Depending on the kind of business you do, right, is going to really vary that number. If you're doing super high-end stuff, you're going to have more employees, so you just got to take that with a grain of salt. But on average, it's a nice checkpoint.
Yeah, it's always good to have those kind of rules of thumb there. All right, we've thrown a ton of data at you, a lot of charts, a lot of numbers. Let me just kind of take a quick pause and see if anybody's got any questions, you got any observations. We've covered a lot of ground really quickly. What are your thoughts?
Well, Ed, I'm doing a lot of absorbing and processing today, so I don't have any real questions at this point.
Randy, I bet coming out of Montana, I'm guessing your average price per square foot is above $80 a foot. Is that true?
Absolutely.
You guys go into Yellowstone, don't you?
No, Yellowstone's too far.
Okay.
But we have some nice resorts here.
Kind of tracking right along with you guys, so.
Okay. All right. You still with us? Maybe.
I'm still with you. I had to take a call though.
Okay. All right. Any
Jill,
go ahead.
Jillian's calling all her what chart was it where they're all her multifamily contacts right now with the amount of building going on in Maine?
All right, good deal. So that's kind of trends, what's been happening, what we think the forecast looks like. It's validated a number of different ways. I think it's good data. Rich and I talked a couple of days ago about doing some updating here. I did a bunch of research and I could find some data, but nothing with good forecast. And I certainly couldn't find the nice, pretty charts. So Rich did an awesome job of finding some new updated data here. It worked out really great. One of the challenges that I deal with when I talk with folks who are looking at, how should I change my business? What market segments should I get into? Should I add cabinets? Should I start moving away from quartz because of the silicosis issue and get more into porcelain and natural stone? What do I need to look at? And the list of issues we've got on the screen are really kind of the big issues that you'll run into. One is Salesforce. The kind of salesperson you have that will talk to Mr. and Mrs. Jones as they walk in to do make a retail purchase, totally different than what you'll have for multifamily or for commercial work. How you manage those projects in commercial work is be much, much more complex. In fact, your really, really high-end residential, and by high-end, I mean like $80,000, $100,000 and up type countertop jobs, those almost need to be managed like commercial work these days, because you've got to break those into phases. You've got to have really good understanding of what's happening on site, what that schedule looks like. You get somebody that calls and says, yeah, we'll be ready for template on Tuesday of next week. And you ride by and look at the site on Friday afternoon or Monday morning and realize, no, they don't even have sheetrock up yet. There's no way you're templating that job on Tuesday. So Salesforce, customer management, those types of things really get heavily impacted by which of these segments you get into. And one of the biggest ones people don't think about is cash flow. I'll get folks who are doing some builder work, some custom builder work, a lot of retail work, and they'll get a chance to bid on a multifamily project, and they haven't even thought about what the payment terms are going to be on that. And you'll have a 30-unit complex that you're going to do. You win the bid and think about, okay, now I got to go get the material to supply 30 units. Hopefully I've got some terms with my supplier, but chances are I got to pay that supplier a long time before I get paid by that customer, because not only does the project can kind of take a while, because, oh yeah, that we'll be ready for countertops in July, in early July. So you get all your material in late June and then go look at the site into June and wait a minute, these guys aren't gonna be ready till August, maybe September. So now you're sitting on that material for a month, 2 months, 3 months. And then when you do your template fab and install, now the contract terms are 30 days. They'll definitely stretch it to 45 or 60. Some of them will even have 60 and 90-day terms in there. So just the cash flow for something like that, especially if you're a smaller shop, I've watched that kind of thing kill businesses,
Yeah.
not just in this industry and others. So that's a huge issue to really look at. In fact, I've got a client I was working with that was he was moving heavily into multifamily government funded stuff. And this was actually up in Canada. And he was going at it so fast, but he didn't have the cash. And I kept telling him to slow down and slow down and slow down. And he ran out of cash. So it's easy to go chase the brass ring, but you got to be ready for the cash flow impact, especially in commercial.
And add those multifamily, those big multifamily. I mean, just to add even more pain to it, right? I mean, generally they'll keep 10% as retainage, right? So you won't get your 10% back. So if you're phasing in, doing this, they're popping out 10% every time. That could be your total profit on the job, and that retainage gets paid after the project is complete, right? And everything is, and we're generally the last ones paid. So if that builder's having cash issues, now all of a sudden you get a fight for your retainage. So it's a scary, as much as I say, I mean, I love multifamily, but it is a scary endeavor.
Yeah, a lot of things to be aware of, and not trying to say not to do multifamily. It's just if you're going to go into this arena, be prepared.
Yeah.
The fab side of things gets to be a big challenge. I was working with a shop in the UK a couple of years ago that was doing, when you get over in Europe, their countertops typically are smaller than ours. A typical kitchen for us in a middle class home is 60, 70, 80 square feet, depending on the size of the island. They're half that size in Europe typically. And so their typical residential countertop business is a lot like our kind of like multifamily, like apartment complexes, that sort of thing. And so this was a large fabricator. I think they were probably in the $12 to $15 million size range as a comparison. But they ran a lot of residential stuff, small, eased edge, pretty simple, not really expensive. And then they also were bidding on commercial projects for install in the lobby of hotels in Dubai and Harrods department store in downtown London, a lot of really high-end, super custom restaurant type work and all that. And on the fab side, the only way they could run that and run it well was everything went through the same cutting operation, but after that, it totally split because the rectangles, L's, E's edge, small residential type stuff went through one process. They could go through a CNC router. They could do some quick hand polish and a little bit of fab maybe, and then out the door it went. That high custom got, it had been water jetted out, but then everything was hand fab after that because it was so custom. Two different skill sets, two different schedules, it's almost like two different manufacturing plants under the same roof. And that's something I've seen not just in this industry, but in others. When you've got high volume, simple stuff, and you try to mix it with the really high quality, high price, custom type work, you really have to manage those two product flows differently. And so when you start looking at your fabrication, you look at how you're going to template and install, those are things that a lot of folks don't think about that. And if you're going to start mixing in these different market segments, you really got to put a lot of thought into what's your shop going to look like? How are you going to lay this out? How are you going to manage it? When you start quoting lead times, lead times on production builder or multifamily, that sort of thing, quick rectangles, L's, E's, edge, that's short and sweet. You can template Monday and install that Friday or the following Monday easily. You start getting, laminated edges, you start getting mitered edges, you get waterfall legs on islands, custom baths with vertical, wall installs and that kind of stuff. That goes out the window. You got to manage that totally differently. So a whole different aspect of how you run and manage your business. One of the things I get asked a lot is shops, especially smaller shops that want to, in fact, I had this conversation last week with about $1 million shop. And they're, in doing countertops, doing okay, but wanted to get their revenue up, want to get their profits up. So they want to take on a cabinet line. And so my question was talking to the wife who was doing all their sales and all the bookkeeping and, that typical scenario. And I said, okay, so if you start selling cabinets, how much time is that going to take away from you selling countertops? And it depends on what you're selling and how you're selling it. Because if you're doing design work on cabinets, starting to design that kitchen, that's a whole lot more time. And then the detail of that, how are you going to handle the install? Are you going to do that? Are you going to contract that out? those issues get in. And what I found a lot of times is shops that are struggling to make a profit with countertops that want to go in and add something like cabinets, that can actually hurt them. Because if you're not executing well on your core business, countertops, you go bring in a different product line that requires some of your existing resources to execute well on to make a profit. If you're not executing well on your core, what makes you think you're going to execute well on something else new and different? And so those types of decisions and thought processes get to be really critical as you look at diversifying your product line, diversifying your market segments. Those are all things to be thought about to make sure that when you make a change like this, number one, you're prepared for it. And number two, you're prepared to be successful with it, both from a cash flow management standpoint and from an execution standpoint.
And I've got a topic for us. It's right in this cash flow line. If I could make a plea to the people on the call, look at, for your retail business, especially if you're retail heavy, how you're collecting payments for those jobs, right? We had a big initiative at the Rockheads a couple of years ago, and essentially our entire group now gets 100% payment before the job's ever cut. And it just follows in line with, if you go to a big box, you are paying for the entire purchase then, right? So the shops that we used to have that would do 50% at order and then ask the installers to pick up another 50%, which they don't like doing. We've abandoned that, and there's been no pushback from customers. So we strongly recommend, if you're not getting 100% at signing of the contract, you're getting at least 75 then, and then you get 25% before you cut it. That's easy cash, and you'll be amazed at how that helps the cash flow of the business.
Chris, is that what you guys do?
Yeah. Another thing we did was we added 3% on all our quotes throughout for the card fee, and we got paid. We just noticed we started getting paid so much quicker. And it's instead of like, you want to pay with card with 3%, or we just put it in the quote, hidden in the quote everywhere. And that's helped our cash flow tremendously, like surprisingly.
Yeah.
We do a 50% deposit typically, and the rest after install.
Sounds like we should up that.
Yeah, our group was really surprised that there was no pushback, from the customers. So maybe you try it out and kind of see what the feel is before you dive all the way in. But it was really eye-opening that people expected it and we just weren't asking for it.
Yeah, if you think, the example that I use when I'm talking with clients about that is, okay, you go buy a car. You're not driving that car off the lot until that dealer has been paid for that car by somebody. You're either bringing in a bag of cash or writing a check or the credit union or the bank or somebody is financing that thing for you. And the same with the house. You're not getting the keys to that house till somebody's paid to sell it. So it's not that unusual. It's a very common thing. Another comment on the 3% that Chris and Crystal were talking about was if you think about a shop that's struggling to make a profit and maybe your net is 3 or 4%, which is not uncommon to see in this business. That 3% credit card fee, if half of your business is retail and they're paying mostly by credit cards, there's half your profit right there, half your net. So that's definitely something to consider. That's a good point, Chris.
So Rich, in the Rockhead group, and majority are collecting 100% up front. Is that just with retail customers, or how are they handling builders?
Yeah, just retail. Builders is still case by case, whatever they can negotiate. So that unfortunately we haven't made great strides on the builder side.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's more of a negotiation. I've heard on some cases, even in some commercial, there's some negotiation, but that's rare to see that with your contractors. I think that's one of the things I talk to clients about a lot is people want to figure out how to be with the pressures that are showing up in the charts that Rich showed us earlier. A little bit of a recessionary type economy going on. There's certainly going to be a lot of price pressure. So people are always asking, so how do I fight that? Well, if you're if you understand what your B2B customers, your builders, your K&Bs, those folks really want, and what they want is they want the least amount of hassle. They want a schedule that they can count on. They want somebody that's going to partner with them and help them get their projects wrapped up. Because a lot of times we're one of the last, trades to be in there, so they can close that project out and get their final draw. If we go in and leverage that and make sure that our customers are aware of how well we handle those things, we're going to get less price pressure, make us more competitive. And that's the kind of thing that's gonna help, help you with weathering a storm, some of the economic headwinds. It also gives you possibly the opportunity to do a little negotiation on terms. You do a really good job with that.
And Ed, just to change topics slightly, but I was remiss talking about big box before. And so a couple of quick thoughts on big box. The cash flow of a big box is phenomenal. You guys get paid right away, right? Because they're collecting right away, so they don't mind sharing that. So getting big box or servicing big box from a cash perspective is great. From every other aspect of it, not so great. But what we've done a lot of analysis at the Rockheads. What Depot and Lowe's like to do, unfortunately, is give you 7 to 10 stores as a test. It is guaranteed you will lose money on those 7 to 10 stores. What you need, again, from our research, you need to get to 20 stores. And again, round numbers, but you've got to have more stores if you expect to make money on those Depot deals. So, and they will. So if you're debating whether to do any big box work, and you can get closer to 20 stores, it is a massive difference than just starting with the 7 to 9 that they like to give you. And then I've got a little bit of inside baseball here. Lowe's is going through a massive Fabricator change within their business. They've just rotated out about 10%. And they're going to not necessarily rotate out 100%, but they're analyzing every vendor within their stores right now. And so there's going to be a lot of opportunity nationally to pick up Lowe's stores. So just something to keep in mind. Good for cash flow, not great for profit margin.
Hey, Rich, with Lowe's doing that rationalization of their vendors, are they evaluating them based on service? Are they doing a lot of renegotiation on pricing? What's kind of their key metric they're looking at as they decide who to keep and who to get rid of?
Yeah, so I can tell you what they've done so far. Lowe's has 2 main suppliers, Cosentino and Sage, right? And Sage is essentially a middleman, right? Lots of different manufacturers sell into Sage, and then Sage sells it. They have now removed 10% of the stores from Sage and gone directly to Doll Tile.
Wow.
Doll Tile's plan is to get the other 90%, right? This is kind of a pilot. And so to your question, Ed, Doll Tile now has the ability to select which shops they want to service their Lowe's stores.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting opportunity if you're up for it. I think one of the, I've heard you made that stat before about the 7 versus 20 stores. And the thing I keep thinking about, and you've probably seen this with your own eyes, is that to get from 7 stores to 20 stores, you really got to have your processes really well dialed in, and you start getting economies of scale for almost a production line that's really almost dedicated to that type of work. You've got to really understand how to work well with the stores. You've got some people between you and the end user customer. You've got to have good processes and ways of getting around that so that you can handle expectations and schedules. So setting all that up to do 7 is one big challenge, probably a pretty big hill to climb. But then once you've got that dialed in, going from 7 to 15 to 20 to higher, certainly you can start scaling, and you get the benefit of repeating that process over and over, and the economies of scale start working for you, I would suspect.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, and then one other note in the big box world, if you have an opportunity to service Costco's, it can be extremely profitable right out of the gate. So certainly look closely at obviously there'll be less stores. That that 20 number certainly doesn't apply to Costco's, right? You can make money at 2, 1, 2, 3 Costco's. So again, just the way they do business, right? A little bit higher clientele, definitely more margin in there to be made.
Good to know.
Isn't the Costco process more like a, what is that like direct in-home sales type
Yes.
of situation?
Yep. It's right. Exactly. It's all lead driven. So once you're in the home, you've got the opportunity to upsell and upsell and upsell. And again, now, Ed, you know me, I'm always off on different tangents, and I apologize, and you're always so friendly about it. Another wave within the Rockheads, in-home sales, right? I mean, I have a shop in North Carolina that had a main office and 2 satellite offices. They are literally shutting down the 2 satellites and going to all in-home. Right? They've got their sample mix. They've trained each other. They've trained themselves. And so, Jillian, to your point, with Costco being an in-home sale, the rest of the nation is kind of doing more and more in-home sales. We're doing a webinar on it in a couple of months because it's such a big thing out there now.
Yeah, in fact, I was,
Good to know.
go ahead, Jillian. I was gonna say, I was in a shop in the Tampa area, I think it was last year. Rough size, 18 to 20 million a year. And they do, their showroom looks like the showroom of about $1 million shop or less, because they've got a staff of, I think they had like 6 or 8, maybe 10 salespeople. Absolutely, totally 100% in-home sales. They have a whole mechanism for generating leads and for making outbound calls and inbound calls. They have a group that screens those and sets those appointments up. And salespeople go through, the salespeople are 100% commissioned, and they go through, I think it was 4 to 6 weeks of training, 40 hours a week before they get turned loose to sell. Mm-hmm. It's a really, really intense, very, very organized, very structured, and very successful. They were making money hand over fist. So that's a trend to keep an eye on. I've heard of a few, and I think I know who you're talking about in North Carolina, Rich. I'd be curious to see how well he works out with that. Mm-hmm. But because I know a little bit about him, but that if that continues, that could be an interesting trend. Now, the one in Florida I was talking about was their product lines were only quartz. They were not doing any natural stone, and I don't know that they were doing any porcelain. If it was, it's a very small percentage. But then they were scaled for it. They had a 3-shift operation, their production side. Yes, Julia.
Sorry, I'm sure you'll get into this more in that seminar, but that is like an interesting sort of potential expansion area if you're not doing in-home sales, which I'm not currently. But I heard that Lowe's and like some of the other boxes had actually pulled away from that. Yeah. I know a few people were very upset about that. Do you have any insight as to like why would they do something like that, or is that just part of this colossal shift that they're going through?
That's a great question. I don't, and I definitely know the same thing that you're talking about, that they have moved away. I forget what they called their in-home sales initiatives, but yes, they piloted it and they launched it in a bunch of areas, and now they are pulling it back. I don't know. You've piqued my curiosity. Now I'm going to reach out to a couple of my guys and try to figure that out. But as Costco is being incredibly successful with it, Depot, SF&I, that's what they call it. Depot is pulling back from it. I don't know why. I don't know if it's because they lose control of the sale, but they're not as excited about it as they once were.
It's definitely a different challenge. You think about all the things that you've got in your showroom that help the sales process from a retail standpoint. It's a different challenge when you're essentially making that portable. Mm-hmm. So, and you can imagine the kind of training somebody would go through for 4 to 6 weeks to learn to do that. There was a portion of that, of course, was product and process, but the majority of that training was all sales technique. Yeah. How do you read the room? How do you upsell? All the stuff that, quite frankly, I think a lot of salespeople in our industry could benefit from good professional sales training. And I think the larger fabricators already do some of that, but a lot of the mid-level, $6, $7, $10 million and below shops can really benefit from that kind of training. And when you get into in-home sales, I think it gets to be a necessity.
Yeah.
Good comments, good questions. Thanks for jumping in here. I hate it when we do something like this and Rich and I do all the talking. I feel like we're, I think you miss the thing. I'm a big believer in the peer-to-peer learning. That's what groups like Rockheads, this for the rest of them do, is when you get together, you learn so much from each other, asking questions, sharing ideas. And that's one of the reasons that I like these webinars is we get a kind of a miniature version to do this for an hour or so. Well, folks, appreciate you joining us. Hope this has been worthwhile for you. This is the whole reason we do this, is to share information with you, help you grow your business, help you become more successful. That's why groups like Rockheads exist. That's why I do what I do. We're out here to help folks out. So thank you for joining us. We hope you guys have a great day. Thanks a lot.